Welcome to the Gravity Well, where we break down heavy ideas into small buckets anyone can handle. In our work and at play, we seek the wisdom of elders, individuals, and communities to share their knowledge, to care for our water, air, land, life, and resource needs. A healthy relationship with our homeland and each other is our guide.
Excellent. I am just going to do a roll call. This is a bit weird for us because we're doing it on a different system today. But so we have Gerry Bietz, that is with the Bighill Creek Preservation Society, and we're joined with the Polluter Pay Federation team. So Mark Dorin, Reagan Boychuk, Dwight Popowich, Vern Bretin, and myself, Jenny Jeremy, and Alex McGilvery, of course, my co-host here. So we are going to dive into our original discussion, which is around the who's who in the zoo in Alberta. But first, we've got Gerry that's here to talk about the issues that he's seeing in terms of gravel pits in Bighill Creek. I've been attending the Watershed Council meetings, been very concerned about water shortages, and originally started with the logging campaign, looking at the clear-cut logging that's happening in the headwaters of the Highwood, and realized that it's a broader issue than that. So we've started looking at watersheds, and I'm now on the Bow River Basin stewardship committee of that. So being that I get to hear what all the watershed groups are doing, and so now I'm trying to go to all the watershed meetings and learning a lot. Last week I was at in Sundre and heard about some gravel pit extraction and water usage by industry that was quite alarming. I had just been to the Cochrane meeting, the Bow River Basin hosted in February, and met with some members of Gerry's group, the Bighill Creek Preservation Society, and they brought me this gravel pit concern to my attention. So here we are. We're going to let Gerry expand on that. Alex and I have been meeting with a group that we're going to have a meeting, they will join us next week. And they're doing a strategy in meetings to try and make sure that meetings are actually more democratic, and that the purpose of everybody, like everybody's perspective, is brought in really well. So we're going to use that system today. So I've got, 3 questions that I want us to kind of use as we go around to help Gerry sort of explain his issue, and then we can give our perspective back to him on it. So we're going to test some stuff in this. This is kind of flexing this learning muscle that we're trying to do in these conversations too. Okay, so that's enough on the background, and I did a little bit of intros. So Alex, do you have any reflections or anything before we start that you want to offer?
Well, looking into that whole Bighill Creek area and studying the topographical maps, there's some things that I'm interested in learning a little bit more about. I had no idea there were 86 active wells, 18 abandoned wells, and 2 active pump stations within that region. I was amazed, floored when I started looking at the maps. I'd like to know maybe your views on those things in relation to the creek and the aquifers and the surrounding environment. So with that, I'd just really like to get started and hear what you have to say, sir.
Well, thank you. Let me give you a little bit of if I may, a little bit of an overview as to who we are and what we're doing. Bighill Creek Preservation Society is a group of local people who've undertaken the long-term preservation of the Bighill Creek drainage, which is unique in this area in Alberta. It's unique in that it was created at the end of the last glaciation by a torrent of water over the course of 3 or 4 weeks that basically flushed out all of the overlaying glacial till and gravel layers, cut down through the bedrock into a deeply incised valley that is now primarily spring fed. So the foundation of the health of the environment in the Bighill Creek drainage is groundwater, and the supply of that groundwater from the numerous springs that erupt down through the basin. The drainage itself is relatively small. It's about 174 square kilometers, which is smaller than Horse Creek or Grand Valley on the western side. It's, as I said, it's deeply incised. It's very diverse in terms of its ecology. The focal point of the drainage is Bighill Springs Provincial Park. At Bighill Springs Provincial Park, there is the main spring that erupts from an aquifer that extends out to the north and west. And that aquifer supplies about 50% of the water that comes into the Bighill Creek. That water is very consistent in its quality and quantity, and it sustains the bottom up through all of the categories of the ecology that are experienced in the valley. So this is a very unique area, and our group, as I said, is dedicated to the long-term preservation of the valley and the ecology that it sustains. There are numerous potential impacts on that preservation. We see subdivisions extending out from Cochrane and from subdivisions in Rocky View County, residential subdivisions. We see, and I live in this area. I've got my own well that is served from the aquifer. So I'm dependent upon it. I enjoy that opportunity, but I also know the impact that it creates. We have oil and gas production in this area, and that has been relatively benign in terms of the impacts recently. It's obviously a visual impact, but those wells are deep. What's come to pass in the last little while with refracking has extended our current concern regarding the groundwater impacts. And the more overarching concern that we have right now is the proliferation of gravel along the aquifer that extends out from Bighill Creek out to the west. And currently there are approximately 800 acres of lands adjacent the park or immediately adjacent the park that would be developed for gravel. And those gravel mines would remove up to 25 meters of gravel and excavate down to within 1 meter of the flowing water in the aquifer. And we as an organization and local residents have opposed many of these gravel operations because we're concerned about the potential impacts on the removal of the till, the overburden, and the removal of those 25 meters of gravel and the filtration that provides for water that flows down from the surface water permeating through the glacial till and the gravel filtration down into the aquifer, and obviously what erupts at Bighill Springs Provincial Park and into the creek. And we know from our analysis, the studies that have been done, that when gravel is exposed to the atmosphere and weathering and leaching, that there is the opportunity for harmful chemicals to flow into the groundwater. And we would expect that over the course of time, with the proliferation of these gravel operations, that will do harm to the creek and all the biodiversity that it sustains. So that is where we are. I also have another hat besides being the president of Bighill Springs Preservation Society. I'm also on the Rocky View County Aggregate Resource Committee, which is currently in deliberations on how the county might manage gravel extraction over the course of time, not only today, but obviously into our children and grandchildren's horizon. So these are things that are very much in the forefront and things that we're working on. In regard to what we're looking for, obviously we want people to understand the importance of Bighill Creek, the Bighill Creek drainage, the opportunities that are presented from the quality of the water, the biodiversity that it represents, and the opportunities for people to get out of the landscape and really benefit from having an opportunity for being in the outdoors. Those are our kind of the linchpins of our approach to this. We think that people cannot really appreciate the open spaces and the natural environment unless they have the opportunity to experience it. And we recognize that experience also comes at a cost to the environment, but we see that there's an opportunity to create a balance between allowing people to get out onto the landscape, appreciate the value that it provides, and then move forward to protect it. What we'd ask listeners to do in terms of gaining knowledge on this would be obviously go to our website, visit the park. There's a road allowance that extends from Cochrane up to the park. It's a public road allowance, and if people are inclined to walk up there, it's available for walking. It's bordered on both sides by private lands, and so if people are inclined to walk up there, we'd encourage them to make sure that they respect that private land, don't interfere with livestock or wildlife, and enjoy it, because it's a marvelous place. We'd like you to obviously go to Bighill Springs Provincial Park. It's only 70 acres. It sees 250,000 people a year or more, because those numbers were taken before COVID and and before densification in the cities and all the things that are happening around us. So it's a marvelous place, and it needs to be recognized, and it needs to be protected. It needs to be, quite candidly, needs to be expanded, because it's being loved to death. The province spent $1.2 million in hardening the pathways and trying to protect the sensitive areas. But I've been there. I know how much people love it, and that's it. It needs further respect. We've put up on our website a map that illustrates the potential gravel production that we'll see out of this area over the next 40 years, because gravel production, as you might know, is an extended process. From the gravel industry's perspective, it's a short-term enterprise. But for anybody on this call, it's terminal. We won't see the end of these gravel operations in our lifetime, and I don't suspect my children will see the end of them. When these gravel operations are complete, there could be up to 1,000 acres of depressions, up to 25 meters deep, and up to 300 acres in extent in each individual site. And many of them, I believe, will have what they call end of pit lakes, which means they're depressions that collect water. And if there's inadequate till and gravel filtration provided, then whatever contaminants reside on that landscape have the propensity to infiltrate into the water, flowing water in the groundwater. So thank you, Alex, for putting this up. So this is an illustrative map of the extent of gravel potential in our area over the course of the next 30 or 40 years. What you can see there, you can see kind of in the center right of the screen is Bighill Springs Provincial Park. It's about 70 acres in area. On the left, there's an inverted L-shaped area that's owned by Burnco. The next 2 quarter sections are owned by a company called Mountain Ash, which is the Summit Pit. Mountain Ash has been approved. We've gone to the Alberta Environmental Appeals Board, asked for them to investigate the premise on which the Water Act approval was given for that operation. The next one is our next quarter section is owned by Lafarge. The next one is an operating pit that's owned by a company called Hillstone, and the one across 567 has been approved, and we opposed that at the Land and Property Rights Tribunal, and we're unsuccessful in having that set aside or mitigated in terms of its impact. And so that one will go ahead in the next little while. On the west side of Highway 22 is 2 quarter sections that were recently acquired by Heidelberg. They didn't buy that property to turn it into a recreational area. On Cochrane West, I don't know whether you're familiar with this area. Cochrane West extends out across the Grand Valley area. The lands are owned or controlled by Burnco. They've received approval for 1/4 section of gravel extraction there. They unsuccessfully applied for a redesignation for land use to Rocky View County for the remaining 12 quarters of land. Irrespective of that declination by Rocky View County, Burnco was successful in going to Alberta Environment and Parks and receiving a Water Act approval for that land. They now have the ability to mine. My understanding is that they have received approval to mine into the active aquifer and use Bow River water for gravel washing in their crushing operations. So these are all of the local issues that we face in terms of the potential impact on groundwater.
Gerry, if I may, I have another set of maps. You remember that booklet that I was talking about?
Yes.
And if you don't mind, I could bring some of these up to help illustrate what you're saying.
Please go ahead.
It's really cool, actually, this map book that they have. This is the one that I was most interested in, because what's in red is the suitability levels in terms of further gravel works. So that doesn't mean that those are current. Those are just land that they consider suitable for future extraction projects. And then in moderate to low to very low. But you can see that what they find suitable is basically carving the whole thing out of the earth if they had it their way. And these 3 colored blocks here are what are currently happening or pending approval. If you go to the watershed map book PDF, you can get access to all these maps.
And these maps were created about 5 years ago by students at SAIT. They were GIS students, and they put together these maps based on what we believe to be credible sources. We asked them to put them together, and when you review them, you need to look at them as illustrative. I think they should not be taken as the finished product, but I think they do give us guidance as to things like where the gravel resource is. Here's a map, I think, that shows where they suggested these were areas in which that might be suitable for gravel exploration. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
That was their interpretation. I wouldn't say it's wrong, but I think it's one interpretation. So please, if you review these maps, don't assume that they are the final product.
It's an ever-evolving circumstance. I discovered these very well put together. I've looked into some other counties, and they don't have anything remotely like this. And I think it would be really cool as an idea to have these so that people could have access to the real stuff. I mean, if this was just a student project, absolutely taken into context. But where can we get the GSC involved in doing something like this?
There are a number of things that are going on in the county that that lead me to have some optimism. The Calgary Metropolitan Regional Board has undertaken a study of the environmentally sensitive areas in Rocky View County, and so that is one guidepost for not only gravel excavation over the course of time, but also other kinds of municipal planning. You know, where are our environmentally sensitive areas, and how much protection do they deserve? What kind of setbacks? How do we plan around them to ensure that my grandchildren, your great grandchildren, all those kids that are going to come in the next 100 years, they have access to these spaces, and that they have the opportunity to generate the environmental assets that they have for the last 10,000 years. So that's the challenge, and mapping, whether it's gravel mapping or ESAs, or Rocky View County has recently undertaken a study of the appropriate locations for solar and wind power. Those are all important aspects. I'm a maps guy, so This a map will tell me 10,000 times as much as a document. So there needs to be more public outcry to politicians and to other interested parties as to what the issues are in regard to protecting groundwater in these areas. Gravel is front and center to us. They all need to better understand that people are concerned about the landscape and the natural assets that are here and the water that it will sustain, especially through these next periods where water will be at a premium.
Yeah, go ahead, Dwight. I see you have a question.
Yeah, I live right in the middle of one of these gravel areas. I have a pit that's just a quarter mile up from me, and I've had my land them looking around looking for gravel. When they did the Anthony Henday around Edmonton, a good chunk of that gravel came from my area. And we drove around on really beat up roads and whatnot, and I think our county did a real terrible job of getting right their share of the money to look after those roads. That is going to be an issue because that's what these guys do. Counties, MDs, they make money from selling gravel. They want landowners to develop this stuff. And that's in my area. We are a big supplier of gravel in this area, and we've been supplying a good chunk of the province. And so I have landowners that would say, no way that you're going to tell them that I can't develop that. And so there's going to be a bit of a fight here over that for sure.
The benefit directly to the county from gravel production comes under what they call a community access premium, I think it is, or it's called a cap levy. And it's currently 40 cents a ton. And that is basically in Rocky View County, that's the extent of the revenue that's generated. In Rocky View County in 2017 or 18, the last numbers that I had, they generated $1 million in revenue from cap levy. There's another levy that they might impose upon a specific pit to upgrade roads in their immediate area. But those are the two sources of revenue. Those sources of revenue do not cover any of the costs.
That's what my point is in our area, did we get back enough from the gravel royalties to even pay for the upkeep of the roads? The roads got so beat up that it was, I don't even know how you explain. They have to keep a grader on it 24 hours a day so we could get through there properly. It was ridiculous.
Well, and so that is the issue, and the county needs to have full management of the gravel industry. They need to monitor the activities. They need to set standards in terms of the fugitive emissions from the pits. They need to be responsible in managing the cumulative impacts of traffic on the roads and the impact on roads and the environment. So those things have to be actively managed, and they need funds to do it. And the cap levy doesn't, in our mind, provide sufficient funds to do that. So that's our view, and this might be something that other jurisdictions might take a look at.
That cost thing has to be part of your message, I think, to the public, because it's going to be tough selling landowners on the water issue alone. Because if they can see development as a way to put a few dollars in their pocket, that's what they're going to lean towards. So if they have gravel on their land, it's going to be a tough sell unless you can show to them there is actually a loss to them through taxes and stuff like that. So that's, I think, where you need to push.
Well, the role of government is to recognize the benefit of the broad constituency versus the individual constituents, and so there needs to be regulation. Obviously, there's a debate in regard to property rights and who's got rights and who doesn't have rights. But in the overall, there needs to be management of resources, no matter whether it's gravel or oil or gas or any other, or whether it's wind farms. There needs to be recognition that the benefit of a few can't compromise the loss of many.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Vern.
So, Gerry, my understanding is there's a Cochrane lady and a few other people from the Cochrane area, maybe the Bearspaw area, who were complaining deeply about their water wells and the fact that they were not able to shower anymore because of now that my understanding that was oil and gas. Now that is a different aquifer than yours. And have you heard of the water difficulties in the Bearspaw area? I think it is.
I've not heard of any specific concerns in regard to the impact on water wells. I know there's been concern about fracking and the impacts on water wells. I've personally not seen evidence or heard direct anecdotal evidence that those things have occurred. In regard to groundwater and water wells and gravel, I've definitely heard concerns about that, and we quite candidly are looking for data. Concerns have been raised, and there's a dearth of data available, and that's one of the things that we struggle with, is that we need to have what a lawyer would say would be a priori, before the fact, data analysis to determine what this, for example, what the quality and quantity of groundwater is before these things start to impact it. We need that data is very important
data
now, and it will be over the course of time as things like oil and gas or gravel start to impact the groundwater supply.
Yeah. Alex, go ahead. I think you had a question.
When you were mentioning 40 cents a ton, I just thought to myself, like, okay, so $1 million at 40 cents a ton, that's like 2.2 million tons of earth that's just taken right out of there. That's unbelievable. You know, it should be way more than that, to justify it.
The Gravel Association says that each one of us, either directly or indirectly, consumes 15 tons of gravel every year to build our homes, to build our roads, to build our schools, and to support the burgeoning population in Alberta.
It's not a renewable resource. That's something we need to remember.
It's not renewable, but within our time frame, it's inexhaustible. A small percentage of the gravel availability can provide all the needs for southern Alberta, certainly, for the foreseeable future. Now,
I do know that the street sweepers in Calgary do collect the gravel off of the roads, and they pile it in a separate area, and then they recycle it every year, because they can kind of resell it by the ton. So they do as best as they can to make use of it once it's there. But still, I just think 40 cents per ton, and it takes a lot of earth to move just to make that $1 million.
And as we've talked, it doesn't offset the costs to residents and to the environment.
No, and as Reagan pointed out in the chat here, even the gravel companies only make 30 cents a ton too. So it's a narrow margin business for a bigger effort. And my experience in oil and gas, I was in the oil and gas industry for 22 years, and we go after the best stuff first. We go after the stuff that's got the lowest burden, the lowest cost to get to it, all of these things. So the concern I have around this happening now is that we're going to get, this is probably an even more expensive project. And those numbers that you were talking about in terms of the, covering the road maintenance costs and things, that's probably even more out of whack with what is going to be required to do this. So I'm going to throw back one question, and then I'll let Reagan ask his. Sorry, Reagan, I think you were going to try and offer something. So the way I see a potential solution to the challenges that we face is land use agreements. We're supposed to not just be getting after emissions reductions, but we're also supposed to be doing what you hinted to earlier in this good discussion, Gerry, is removing ourselves from the landscape wherever we can, right? We're supposed to be doing net restoration in the province as well. We have 2 precedent-setting sub-regional plans that have sites on timelines for that intention, so that we start peeling ourselves back from the landscape. So I guess I'm going to throw it back to you. You pointed to the map, and I'll make sure to include that in the video once we do this. But is your ask that none of this goes ahead? Is it like, are you okay with some of it? Can you be specific about what you think should happen in this area? My personal view from what you're saying is none of it should be going ahead. We need to be doing preserving, as I was saying, but I would like to get, make sure I am understanding that properly. Thanks.
So in regard specifically to Bighill Springs and the operations that may be going forward there in the next 30 years, as a realist, I know that one pit is currently operating, and it probably will receive approval for expansion. 2 more have been approved, and irrespective of our appeals, I think it's highly likely that they will go ahead. Given those, our view would be that no more are necessary. There's a debate that goes on between the benefits of agglomeration, where you create the mother of all pits and minimize the halo that's created by numerous pits and the impacts that they create. What we have at Bighill Springs is a proliferation of small pits, each one of them that generates fugitive emissions in terms of noise, dust emissions, impacts on the environment. We see the impacts on groundwater, all the cumulative effects, all strung out in a line from basically from Bighill Springs Provincial Park, almost all the way to Highway 22. And that's a wide swath. Those berms and the noise and the activity create barriers to wildlife corridors, and this is a very active area for wildlife. All those impacts occur. So our ask would be, if we have to contend with the pits that have already been approved, the mines that have already been approved, let's manage them in a way that will mitigate as best we can the impacts that they have on the environment. And then let's try to focus our new endeavors in areas in which we can attempt to minimize impacts for everybody, on local residents, on groundwater, on the environment. And let's manage the gravel industry across the county so that we get the benefits in commensurate with the costs. Let me put it that way.
Absolutely did. Thank you very much. So Reagan, I'll let you go first, and then Mark, I see you have your hand up next.
I didn't actually have anything to say. Martin, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, no, I think you're just pointing to in the chat the royalty rate being brutal, and the money that we're actually making on this really needs to be understood. It's not dissimilar to the logging. We're really not getting cents on the dollar there too, and where the risks are way higher than the economic benefit. Okay, go ahead, Mark.
Gerry, I was just wondering, and I made a written submission to the Alberta Utilities Commission in this regard recently on the renewables moratorium on behalf of Polluter Pay Federation. But one of the ways of managing this at law in Alberta is through the Alberta Land Stewardship Act. And I don't think that there's a regional plan for your area in place yet. I could be wrong, but that would be one way of, there's one way of designating areas through a regional plan that should take precedence over any decision, for example, of Alberta Environment. Are you aware of this? Has your group looked into trying to deal with the people that are developing the regional plan for your area to set aside this area or put development restrictions on it in a regional plan?
No, I'm not aware of it. I'd be happy to engage in that.
The problem we've got in Alberta, like where Vern lives, is the South Saskatchewan drainage basin. I think it's only one of 2 completed regional plans, and there's, I believe, 7 areas in the province. So it's quite remarkable and quite perhaps scandalous that these regional plans have not been developed. So it's high level planning. So we've talked about approvals. Presumably these are from Alberta Environment. Is that right? Are the approvals coming from Alberta Environment and what they call protected areas now? And were your appeals through the Environmental Appeal Board? Though I guess that's my 2-part question.
The process requires that the applicant, the gravel company, needs to go to Rocky View County and request a land use redesignation. So it would be transferred from agricultural into industrial utilization. And through that process, there's a hearing activity, They are required to make submissions in terms of the biodiversity inventory, surface water, groundwater. There's a whole list of a checklist of reports that they need to make. Unfortunately, the Rocky View County does not have, and I suspect that many other counties do not have the ability to adjudicate the validity of those reports. They make a judgment based on what's presented to them, and without experts to test that validity. That checkbox exercise often results in approvals. And once that approval is given by Rocky View County, then the only approvals thereafter are through Alberta Environment and Parks. A gravel operation has to go through what they call an application for a code of practice for pits, which is basically a very rudimentary overview of a checkbox exercise as to how big is the pit, are you going to follow these standard regulations as to how you manage your operation in terms of berms and noise and some other things like that. But it's a very high level exercise. And once they have that code of practice for pits in Alberta, and if there are wetlands, then they need to go to Alberta Environment and Parks and ask for destruction of the wetlands. And if there are a couple of sloughs on the property, then that's basically pro forma approval. We had to go to Environment and Parks and then impeach them to review groundwater impacts from these wells, or from these mines. They will take off 7 meters of till. They will extract up to 25 meters of gravel. They will leave 1 meter of gravel to protect the flowing aquifer. They'll have an operating area of about 40 acres before they do remediation. All of these things are a significant concern to us. And without an organization like ours going to AEP, these would never become issues. The gravel companies have told me several times, they have no as long as they undertake that they'll stay 1 meter away from flowing groundwater, they have no requirement to do anything further. So these are the things that we are faced with. We've gone to Alberta Environment and Parks and tried to make our case to them. In the case of Mountain Ash, we were declined. And that's why we're at the Environmental Appeals Board today. And as I said earlier, I don't know the outcome of that process, but we're hopeful.
So one more follow-up thing on that is that, so I'm quite familiar with the case in the Court of King's Bench. You probably have heard about it. It's called Court. That's the person's name, not the court. Court versus Environmental Appeal Board. So that's exactly what that case was about. Was a appeal to the Court of King's Bench of an approval for a gravel pit. Mrs. Court had breathing problems. And the approval of the Alberta Environment was quashed by the court because they felt that they didn't deal with the effects on the surrounding public sufficiently enough in approving that gravel mine. So I just wanted to know if you're aware of that case, or at least pointed out to you, because that would be quite an important one. It's a bit of a precedent-setting one at the Environmental Appeals Board.
And that's Court,
C-O-U-R-T. That's the family name.
Okay.
So it's Court versus Environmental Appeal Board, and I'll look it up and I'll post it in the chat.
Oh, if you would, that'd be great.
And so that's one of the leading cases of, and it's probably of interest to anybody. It's really about obtaining status in a hearing to object to something like a development like a gravel pit, and who should be granted status and who shouldn't. Justice McIntyre goes through this, the issues of who should be granted status, etc., in quite detail at about paragraph 70 or so from my memory. So it's one thing we do. Vern and I especially read a lot of court cases, so that was a really interesting one, and I do remember it. Would be quite helpful.
To expand on what the comment you just made, one of the real challenges for organizations such as ours is receiving recognition as a directly affected party. Mm-hmm. And the environment supporters of the environment are, as you probably are aware, are have a very difficult time in establishing themselves as being directly affected. And the only guidance that I can provide to other organizations like ours, your hope has to be that you establish your bona fides early in the process. Long-term studies, science, and the validity of establishing your organization as a supporter of an individual aspect of the environment. That gives you a better opportunity than a high-level environmental action. You need to be on the ground and collecting the data and demonstrating that you are directly impacted, and the area that you're trying to protect is going to be directly impacted. So
Definitely.
Yeah, I see Vern has had his hand up here patiently for a while, so let's let him do that. And I
you're
thought,
probably better off to object on your own, Gerry, as opposed to a group or both, because, you know, if you live in the area and you have a well, then the potential to be directly and adversely affected for you is much higher than the group. But that's a great point you make for societies in general.
If you read through the court decision, what you will understand, and I hope you take away from it, is that the gravel companies also read the court decision. And so they will circumvent the decision that was made in the court decision by following a pathway. But that pathway is clearer for you to now understand, as well as the gravel pit owners. They understand it very much well too. And so they will make sure that they do not trespass those things that are brought out in the court decision. So the court works both ways.
well, thank you.
okay, so I think that covers it. The one thing I will plug for a future conversation is your comment around water wells. So, you know, I heard you talking about baseline data, but I think that's one thing that the not northern, but sundry area groups, they're really looking at is how can we get a database of wells and baseline information so that there is a way to monitor and be able in real time to say something. Go ahead, Dwight, from a landowner.
I think
please.
Alberta Environment should have a lot of that information for you. Every time a water well is drilled, there has to be a report made and it has to be sent. So they have a record of a lot of this stuff.
Sure.
You just need to ask them
Okay.
and tell them which areas. It probably
But I
costs
mean,
more.
ongoing monitoring of the quality and like volume and all that. Is that on an ad hoc, like whoever chooses base? Go ahead, Vern. I see you're shaking your head.
That information is not available to the public, because if you have a well, I mean, I can look up your well, Gerry, on the government website, no problem. I can read everything about your well, but nothing to do with quality. The quality is a personal thing that if you want your quality registered, or sorry, if you want to find out your quality, then that's a private thing between you and whoever tests your well. If you lose that information, it's not available anywhere else. So I've had mine done twice.
I would advise you that Rocky View County, or organizations within Rocky View County under the auspices of the Bow River Basin Council has initiated a citizen science program to monitor individual wells. And to your point, yes, you can get access to the original well data in regard to the depth and possibly the original productivity of the well. But what we'd be looking at is the productivity over time and the quality over time. And so those are things, again, data that need to be brought into this. There needs to be and as an organization, when we look at gravel, we think that it's necessary to be proactive in identifying the quality and quantity of water in all the wells that surround a gravel operation, so that we can identify any changes over time, which you can't measure, you can't manage, you can't recognize. So those are the fundamentals.
Yes,
Yeah.
Gerry.
Okay.
I belong to that organization, and my well is one of the wells that gets tested every time.
Well, I'm supposed to be on the list. I've got a well that's going to be part of that whole process. So as soon as I get moving with it.
Yeah, they're doing a training actually this month. So with that, I will add the training when I share this link so that there are some people, it's open to the public to go and understand this measuring system. But really, I was asking some questions in the last meeting around contamination and what are they measuring? And that's great. I understand that, but I am concerned from a contamination standpoint that there isn't enough focus on it, not only from oil and gas operations, but from now gravel. That's in my view. Anyway, thank you so much, Gerry. This is a really great start. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us. And yeah, I hope this was valuable for you as well. This will be posted next week, and then we'll do our best through social media to make sure people understand what this problem is and what they can do about it for us and for you.
Thank you very much.
Great. So
Pleasure.
You are welcome to stay
or
pardon? Go
Pleasure
ahead.
to meet you all.
Yeah, you as well. We'll be
It's a
chatting
pleasure to
soon,
meet
I'm
you.
sure.
Thank you very
Okay.
much for your time. And the wife and I may be headed up to Bighill Springs this weekend. So if we happen to see you, it'd be nice to shake your hand.
Take care for now, Gerry. Section 2. Okay, so I'm just going to tee off this this model and why I generated it. So the intention was to show that we have balancing forces in this province. I'm going to use the one example and then I'll pass this off to you guys. We have, on one hand, we have governance, right? And not just provincial. We've got governance that's municipal. We've got governance that's federal. And then on the other hand, we have the laws of the land. So what the land is actually capable of. So this example that Gerry just brought forward to us is a really good one, right? We can only do so much. We can't do all the things that this province, this government wants to do. This government, now I'm talking specifically of our provincial government. And because of that, this is this balance that this instability we have. I'm trying to balance the needs of the land versus the needs of what we want to do in terms of operating or managing it. So that's the one example I have. I mean, we've already touched on the regulator here, so I'll let you guys talk about that. But the idea being that I've left some blanks in here, like I have facts versus stories, and I have beliefs versus clubs and things like that. None of these were really intended to be final. This is just to give sort of what are we missing in terms of the picture here, right? So, institutions, not only do I mean universities, but I mean, institutions of religion. Like Dwight, we had an off conversation. Maybe you can expand on that as well. But there are other things that come into play in here. So I'll stop there. The idea, please, if we can just do a roundtable of this model and what you see and how you think that it should look better. Okay, I'll stop there. So maybe I'll hand it. Who's ready first? Okay, Mark's going to go first. Thanks, Mark. You're muted, so please.
Muted.
Is this to be based on this discussion we just had of the Bighill Springs, or?
There could be some things that'll tweak. He talked about the government being a real big player in this. Landowners, we know, are big players in this. So if you just, we can use that example to help fuel who we know are like big decision makers. We haven't talked about lobbyists yet. Where are they in this? So if you guys can just talk to some of those kind of big players, and then we can later maybe talk about that structure. Who's on the other side of that table? Like, for example, we've got lobbyists and we don't have a counter lobbyist, right? That's what we're trying to be as the Polluter Pay Federation, is to offer that. I'm seeing it more and more that there isn't enough counter lobby to industries, to, unfortunately, our government, right? So anyway, I'm going to stop there. Mark, are you okay to go first? We kind of talked about this earlier today, or do you want?
Yeah, I suppose I can. I think that one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that when we're talking about development activities, whether it be oil and gas, renewables, gravel pits, even garbage dumps, that the main thing that's required is what's called the provincial statutory approval and what these do is they legalize an activity that's otherwise illegal. And so there's three main bodies that do this. And I think there's a lot of confusion about which bodies handle which activities for approval, and then who has the follow-up responsibilities for enforcement, etc. So what we're usually doing is balancing the rights of various parties, and someone usually has some sort of property, whether it be gravel or oil and gas or collecting sunlight, off of an area, that some resource that they're trying to gather and exploit somehow. And that usually causes damages to someone else somehow. And so one of the models is certainly in under oil and gas and power lines, et cetera, is to compensate those who are damaged. But that's not being done very well in renewables, for example. If you end up living next to a solar farm or a wind farm and it's not on your property, you could be damaged, but there's no provision for compensation on that. I think there's a lot of confusion in Alberta about who handles what, and especially after the fact. We've talked a bit about how the Bighill Springs gravel pits get approved and how there's an appeal process tonight. But what happens if the people don't, if the approval holder doesn't live up to the terms and conditions of approval? And those are the things that, if there is compensation, those terms and conditions of approval are put in place to mitigate your losses, to minimize your compensation. So if the terms and conditions of approval aren't upheld, well, your compensation's out the window. And so I think we have a lot of problems in this province. This is all called administrative law. There's new arguments that have arisen just this week with the renewables thing about, or even at the Alberta Energy Regulator, when they did a regulatory appeal of a certain actions they took against Alpha-Bo, a rather delinquent oil company, and about whether the appeal should have reviewed whether Alpha-Bo was treated fairly, or whether the appeal should have gone into how the Alberta Energy Regulator deals with these liabilities or the obligations of oil companies in general. So I think we have a serious problem in this province with understanding administrative law. And administrative law is unfortunately a constantly moving target. Governments tend to say, oh, well, here's a problem, so let's break it into two and let's separate power issues from oil and gas issues, etc. And that'll solve the problem. And the constant tweaking, constant moving around of who's in charge of what, and this leads to confusion. You almost have to be an engineer, a lawyer, many other things just to follow. If you have one of these activities on your land or something, just to follow. And we heard Mr. Bietz talk about, even if you are directly affected, how do you get status in a hearing? And if you do get a hearing, how do you bring expert evidence, and how do you go up against a formidable industry as one person? So I think those are the type of problems we're having here. And if you read Supreme Court decisions like I have on administrative law, the Supreme Court will say, well, situation A is extremely rare in the country. No, it's commonplace here in Alberta, and where the Supreme Court has gone through criminal law things in detail, they've never dealt with even a tiny fraction of what people have to deal with in resource development in Alberta. Yeah. So I think we need to really take a serious look at how administrative law, which plays a massive role in almost everyone's life, whether it be from what's occurring for land use through to things like workers' compensation boards, things that are going on in your own towns and cities. Administrative law affects everyone's life in an incredible degree, and yet the average person knows almost nothing about it. And that's how irresponsible players get away with things, whether that irresponsible player is a politician, a corporation, an executive, an individual, a board member on a tribunal. There's irresponsible people everywhere. They're sown through among us everywhere. And they get away with this through ignorance, and we're appointing people to these boards that are just not qualified. It's a serious problem, and I think that until we get a handle on that, we're going to have some serious issues with water, with land, with air. Yeah. It's a fraction of these problems unless we can address the overall administrative law problem. And
but I 100% agree with everything you said. There's too much red tape and nobody knows what the heck's going on. The intentional exclusion is a real problem when it comes to these bureaucracies. So I'll pass it to you now, Vern.
Yes, and until it goes to the courts, never gets cleaned up. Administrative bodies don't necessarily do everything right. an interesting case in regards to what Mark had first spoken of is legal versus Ranger Oil, where the Surface Rights Board told the one operator, go screw yourself. And the court said, no, you can go right back to day one because the operator did trespass on your land. And the only way the Surface Rights Board can deal with this is to go right back to day one and say, you are now owed more money in compensation because you didn't realize that the company was going to trespass on your land. And so I've got all those cases. And then plus on Canley, there's a dissertation from a law professor or somebody that speaks of this legal versus Ranger Oil. So there are ways to go about it, but tribunals aren't necessarily going to follow that unless you bring it forward as a actual law case.
Thanks. Hi, Dale Christensen has joined us. I know I've been connected to you through Neil. I'm Jenny, and yeah, we had a long discussion here with Gerry in Beaver Hill Creek, and now we've switched gears and we're talking about basically trying to cover the powers that be in Alberta and the challenges that we're seeing. So we're having more of a general conversation now, Dale, but wondering
Bighill.
if Bighill Spring. Thank you very much, Vern. Okay, well, you're welcome to hang out and listen to our conversation, or you can step off. But yeah, so we'll just continue here. So I'm just going to reflect back up a little bit what I heard from you, Mark and Vern. So you're saying not only do we have, governance that's not consistent, but we have laws that are not being upheld in a consistent way. So we have courts that are choosing ad hoc what their decisions are, and the players aren't being held accountable to the laws that we know are there in the right courts necessarily. So it sounds to me like one of the challenges we have is that we need to have courts that are focused on evidence and outcome-based approaches rather than one-off decisions and not necessarily any consistency in that.
You can't get to a court without going through an administrative decision maker or tribunal. That's the problem. You must raise the matter before the correct administrative decision maker or tribunal, and only once they've rendered their decision can you appeal that decision to a court. But not all decisions are appealable. And then there's something called judicial review that may or may not apply in certain instances. You've got to show that the decision maker made some sort of an error. What the standards of review are on that, quite confusing. So, it's not simply a matter of the courts. If the courts alone handle these matters, we wouldn't have these sorts of schmozzles, because courts tend to make more correct decisions, whereas in administrative tribunals, there's a broader margin for error, if you will. So these are all unique things about administrative law that are misunderstood. And then we have, we have the lobby efforts of various industries. Oil and gas spends $50 million a year lobbying various decision makers. There's no countervailing lobby from landowners or anyone else who's affected, or environmental groups. What do you expect? Those with the money tend to be able to lobby government and get what they want, and those who don't suffer. So that's a really big imbalance that we need to address.
Thank you. And so you're saying a lot of times that people can't even get their problem heard at an administrative level, let alone do they get the opportunity to then appeal it.
I can assure you, for example, most issues that are widely in dispute in oil and gas, in particular in this province, have never been before a court. Those issues have never been adjudicated or resolved at any time. The Alberta Energy Regulator says that it's not bound by decisions of court. This is an absolutely ludicrous statement for a regulator, especially that's supposed to be an adjudicator of law to say that it's not bound by the law or by the decisions of the courts is absolutely absurd. No regulator in the world should ever be able to say that and get away with it, but ours does every day.
Bananas.
To me, I just find that a lot of the average citizen are totally clueless how things work. And, we need to educate them, because a lot of them don't even have any idea which government does what looks after what government. They get themselves so confused over all this. To me, it's not really that confusing, but it seems like a lot of people it is. And
Yeah, like a really good example is the coal mining issue, meaning a lot of people are pointing to the government when, as Marcus said, this is a regulator issue,
yeah,
yet the government is interfering with the regulator here. So it's really confusing as to who to
Yeah.
point the blame. I'll stop there. Sorry.
yeah, I know, and you're absolutely right. And I mean, the pandemic was another one. Well, they're all upset with Trudeau and the federal government. They're going to Ottawa, but yet it's provincial governments that were putting the mandates in place. And like, I'm going, well, how is this? How do you people not understand that? What do you think Ottawa is going to do when it's a provincial matter? So that's the sort of things that I think that really, really dumbfounds me. But yet I see that ignorance being used by certain groups of people within our province, especially. Take back Alberta. That's exactly
Yeah,
what they're doing.
Spoken about this.
They're
Yes.
dependent on people's ignorance, big time. People not understanding how things work and how it's supposed to work. And we
Well, and
gotta-
actually, Dwight, can you expand on Take Back Alberta? Because we haven't spoken about that in this room yet. Can you talk about that group a bit?
Yes, I will. And that's what I want to get at. We had a little chat here on Tuesday about this, and it's something I've been avoiding talking about because it's a religious aspect to this. And I don't want this to come up as being, well, I am one of those religious people. And unfortunately, I see what's going on here. And Take Back Alberta, if any of you are familiar with David Parker, if you followed him recently, you suddenly may have noticed that he's had a change of heart on Twitter when Nenshi announced that he may be running or was thinking about it. And he's saying, come on, you little bitch, I'll take you on. This is a Christian who, I'm a Christian, look at this going, what's going on here? So I started challenging him, and a few of us started challenging him on his Christianity. Like, if this is what because you're making us all look bad here. And I don't know if he's had a change of heart or not, but some reason or other, he suddenly decided that maybe he shouldn't be doing this anymore. And he's publicly announced that. And he's pulled back from some of that hate mongering. However, some of the things that he has recently said about Polyev and his wife, I don't know if you've heard that. I mean, it's disgusting stuff that he's saying. He says he's not going to go apologize to those people or, look for forgiveness from them, which is, again, then you're telling me that you're sort of on the right path, but you're not there yet, buddy. But I'm saying that he has got a lot of people listening to him that are from the Christian faith, especially in rural Alberta. Religion in rural Alberta is a big deal, a huge deal out here. And a lot of these guys that were at Coates are the same guys that are at TBA. We need to understand that.
Yes.
And that these guys have got control of the religious end of this by some of the stuff that they've been saying, and people are believing this nonsense. So
Yes.
that aspect we haven't even talked about, and that is a hard nut that's going to have to be cracked, because there is a rural and a urban divide here in Alberta. It is definitely there. I see it. I live in it. And it's something that we need to really, really be considering that. I cannot see the NDP, for instance. I don't care who they bring in for a leader to crack this urban or this rural voter. It's very distinct here, but we're not really, really thinking about that. And yet we have to be when our approach. We have to figure out, how do we get through to these people?
Yeah. Thank you,
Because
Dwight.
I have some of them that just will not listen to reason. So I don't know how we're going to break through that.
Yeah, no, thank you. So how I describe it, and we had a really good conversation with Melanie Hoffman in this room about, so please hear this. This is with respect to our dominance over the earth. So we have this problem where we as humans have placed ourselves above the other animals and the ecosystem. And that plays out in religion, right? If you believe in God, you're godly, you deserve to be above the other animals and the other, well, maybe I'm not saying it right. Alex just shaking his head. I'll let you weigh in on that. I did go to Catholic school though, not just by chance. But anyway, the point is, unfortunately, this problem is playing out in a superficial way with people. So, we were talking earlier about the way that we're putting people in camps, like you're describing, Dwight. We've got people that are in religious camps and otherwise. And quite frankly, with this issue around, binary versus non-binary coming into play, to me, that all comes back to this concept of being, like the word Melanie used, is supremacy thinking, right? We have this pure way of being, which we can't necessarily achieve. And so it's a real challenge for us to try and separate out the superficial argument of religion versus this deeper challenge of trying to get away from the way that we're structuring ourselves against nature, which is harming us. So it's being used to pit us against each other. I think it's really important you brought religion into here because it is a big part of this pitting against each other problem.
Well, I'm a man of faith. I was raised Catholic. But I also like to say I'm a man of faith. I'm not a salesman. I only talk what I've walked. And I think that's a really important kind of distinction that sometimes gets lost when money's involved and religion's involved and business is involved and family is involved and property and is involved and environment and all these factors. But really, when you get back to the first task, in the big book of life, Adam and Eve were tasked with tending to the garden. Fundamentally, the first lie was, eat of this fruit of knowledge and, good and evil, and you'll surely be as a god, right? You won't die, And then everybody's running around in our society trying to be gods and demigods and rock stars and movie gods and all this nonsense. And it's all based on the first lie and the deviance from the first and primary responsibility that God tasked us with, which was tending to the garden. And instead, we're pulling weeds and we're killing healthy roots at the same time. That's the approach that we need to have while approaching religious people. We approach them from a place of identifying with their faith and then trying to figure out a way to move forward.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. I think the one problem we need to understand, though, is the big, huge Mennonite base that we have. They don't want anything to do with the rest of us. Okay? They are trying to actually separate from the world. Now, many Christians won't agree with that. That's not what we're asked to do. We're asked to live within the world. And we cannot influence it unless we actually participate. And that's what I do. And that's what drives me to do what I do. But many don't want to. They want to separate totally from the world. They don't want to even hear our message. So I'm trying to just say that we're going to have a tough road to hoe here, folks.
Yes.
It's going to be, we got to come up with a special plan to be able to hit them, to get them interested, to start hearing.
It's like I said to you yesterday on Tuesday, Dwight, it's like, they want to stay separate from the world, but they still want us to buy their onions and chickens, don't they? Okay? So they got to talk to us at some point.
Well, and the comment you used for when you were talking about David Parker was love thy neighbor, right? We have to get back to a place where we have to realize we need to love our neighbor no matter what they look like or what religion they are. And I think that's the way forward, is like you said, Alex, as well here, like, let's use the base principles of we need to look after the nature and we need to look after each other. And let's hold those key pieces of the value of religion and hold us all accountable to them. Those are the opportunities I see in that.
Yeah, and that's exactly how I've approached it. It's with the love thy neighbor approach. Whatever you're doing, is it in the best interest of the people around you, or is it just for yourself? And if it's just for yourself, then maybe you might want to rethink it. But so that's been my approach, and I think that's the approach.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so Reagan, we haven't heard from you. Oh, Dale, are you there now?
He wants to extend his deepest apologies for missing this amazing meeting. Thank you, Dale.
Awesome. Okay, well,
Next
we'll
time.
do this again, Dale. We're going to make sure that we set you up in advance next time, and we're going to have a broader discussion with some more people on gravel and wells and water and all that. So don't worry about missing this one. Oh, I'm sorry. You're a woman, Dale. I don't know why. I apologize for my assumption. Really too bad. Okay, so I'll make sure we chat before we do this again, so you're set up. Okay, so a couple other things that we haven't talked about, and we can wrap it up soon because I realize we are over time, but institutions. I'm really looking at, the way that we're educating in schools and the science-based assumptions, like rather than evidence, having historical scientific facts. I have kids in school. I mean, that was my son that just got home, and I'm looking at the courses we're teaching. We're not really talking about climate. We have people like For Kids Alberta that's trying to get our education system up to date with the biggest issue of our life right now is climate change, and it's not being taught in schools. And subjects that we're still separating. That's the other thing I think is a problem with the struggle we have, is we separate a lot of the problems we have into little facets rather than looking at how they connect. We just talked about gravel pits being related to oil and gas water extraction. Like those are key things that are happening in cumulative effects that we're not really appreciating as we separate them instead of looking at them holistically. So I don't know, that's another challenge I think we have, is to move away from this compartmentalized thinking and into more holistic thinking. And I think that's a challenge that I see in schools and some of the other institutions, whether it be corporations or even organizations. And then the other thing I'm going to ask is around representation. I'm really feeling like the public is not represented in many of these organizations in a meaningful way. There's this whole captured concept that we know has happened with our regulator and our government. It plays out with some of these environmental organizations and things like that. So Reagan, I see you have your hand up. So yeah, go ahead if you have something to offer now.
Yeah, I think education is a key battleground. It's key to making sense of our world, and I think that's why it was such a big priority for Jason Kenney, rewriting it with yahoos, and it's been rewritten again. That's why it is a crucial it's a long-term game, but that's where we learn these frameworks that we understand the world. And when you learn the wrong framework, you're kind of hooped until you can see through that or see a different perspective. And I just heard someone commenting again over having reviewed the latest curriculum and how troubling it is. Especially with Smith, and again, it's going to be an ongoing battleground, and it's not going to be for how many awesome things we can squeeze in. It's going to be how far can we turn back the clock.
100%.
I'm just going to make a comment on the education thing. I noted today they announced that they had this new social studies curriculum coming out, and one of the things they were going to do is they were going to teach all about Canada and the Supreme Court of Canada and how our system works and the rule of law and all that to 7-year-olds in grade 2. And I thought to myself, well, maybe this is why adults don't understand it, because maybe they're teaching it to these kids at too young of an age for them to catch on to these concepts. So I'm wondering if their whole education system is kind of becoming smoke and mirrors too, where it's, look, we're giving an education, but we're not really giving an education.
Very much my concern. Yeah, thank you. Mark, you've got some closing thoughts?
One in particular is like a director of a school district, and and this isn't even Alberta, but I asked them recently, about some of the more controversial issues and how they would deal with those in a social studies class, and they went, "Oh, no way we can raise that topic," and no teacher in their right mind would ever discuss that in a classroom. And so I thought, well, these are topical issues that matter right now. If you can't discuss those in social studies, what can you discuss in social studies? So I think that speaks volumes right there. So I don't have any kids, and I don't have any personal, knowledge of the school system other than asking these questions of those who are in high places. And when you get answers like that, I don't think I'm the only one that would be shocked by the response.
This is a big part of the problem, is the lack of empowerment in teachers to be able to, have big topics, big conversations in their classrooms right now as well. So yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, we've gone quite long today. So thank you guys very much for all of this. So yeah, I'm just going to offer some of my takeaways. Yeah, I heard that we've got, a challenge where people's issues aren't even allowed to be seen or heard in a system. We have to, go through administrative law to actually see, to potentially get an issue brought to the courts or be heard, at a hearing. So, and most of those things are being overlooked on a regular basis, on a daily basis, not only in oil and gas, but now we've heard in gravel as well. And we've got, governments that are, operating above the kind of principles of what our earth can handle. And we're basically fighting on multiple battlefronts, trying to stop them from keeping developing in a place where we're actually trying to get land use moving in the other direction, where we're starting to restore and repair our land. So those are kind of my key things for today. Does anybody have any quick kind of takeaways before we wrap up?
Yeah, I've just got a few. It's Jenny, you touched on most of them, but I think, again, like my way of phrasing it would be, there seems to be a general consensus in the group that there's an intensive regulatory and administrative form of intentional bureaucratic exclusion. And it's impossible for individuals, even counties, to muster up the money or the will to lobby against these extremely wealthy and extremely powerful corporate lobbies, especially when governments are greased by them. So it appears to be an uphill battle, but at the end of the day, we're the stewards of the land locally, and these centralized bureaucrats really have no idea how to make any use of it yet, even though that's a fact, they seem to want to have control over it, and the people who are actually responsible for understanding and maintaining and nurturing it. And as far as the education system goes, I think it needs an overhaul. COVID isolated everybody, showed us what the power of digital interface could do in terms of educating people. So I think like field trips might be in order. It's like, give the kids a tablet with certain restrictions and certain subjects on them, and then they all go to the school, they all get on a bus, and they go to Bighill Springs and they learn about aquifers, and they explore, and they do it that way. It's like, there's no reason why it has to be all homeschooled or all in one building or all solar or all oil and gas or all this or all that. This black and white thinking is what's getting in the way. And I think we can all agree that some things need to be done, but in order to do that, we got to be mature, and we got to be able to listen to each other and learn from each other. So that's my takeaway.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark.
I'll say my takeaway from this is we just seem to lack citizens with critical thinking skills, and we're not giving them those skills in our education system. And we're making a bunch of dumb citizens is what we are. And you'll get what we got as long as this continues. So it's education. That's all we can do.
Thank you, Dwight. Yeah, love it. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, just two thoughts I'd like to leave everybody with is that we're supposed to be in a democracy, and democracies are supposed to be based on the rule of law. And if we deviate from the rule of law, we will just slide into anarchy and chaos. And I think we have to remember that. And the other thing is that I wanted to point out is that lobbyists and the corporations they lobby for have no vote. We keep forgetting that. We're allowing those who effectively have no democratic power to have all the power, and that's on each of us.
Amazing point, Mark. Thank you for that. Vern, do you have any takeaways for us?
I just emailed the little article in Canley. If I can find the stuff that the Surface Rights Board sent me, the actual decisions that they made next to the court decisions, of course, what you were given is the court decisions. I'll send those along. Thanks.
Thanks, Vern. Okay, well, thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate your time. This went really long. So yeah, thank you so much. And hope everybody has a wonderful evening. Bye for now.
Talk again soon. Bye.